everyone, how's it going? I'm back with another video, one I'm really pretty excited about. I am starting a new series that I'm calling a weathering guide. And in this series I'm going to be showing off the cars that I weather for my model railroad and just giving you some of the details, some of the stuff that I did as I weathered my car, some of the mistakes I made along the way, some of the tips and tricks I picked up along the way. And so that hopefully this gives you an idea of how I did it and how you might be able to do it as well. So this right here is a car that I started. This is actually my second box car that I've ever weathered. Some of you may remember my previous video where I weathered a box car. This one I tried a number of new techniques and I think it turned out pretty darn good. So I'm pretty happy with the results and I'm happy to share that with you here today. We'll start off by saying I'm not a master weatherer or anything like that. I picked up a couple tips along the way. I'd like to thank Dan's Railroad 2011, a YouTube channel that I follow, and he does a really good step-by-step tutorial for weathering. I suggest everyone go out and take a look at his work because it was a real huge help for me when I came to weathering this cars. I also follow some military modelers as well and picked up some weathering tips from them, which led me to this car here and to the results that you're seeing here, which I'm pretty darn happy with. This car was, I approached this car in a very similar manner to my very first car, which was I wanted a box car that I knew was going to be one that I would heavily weather. In fact, one that I would weather so much so that if I made mistakes along the way, I would hopefully be able to cover those mistakes with the weathering job. And I made quite a few mistakes along the way. Luckily, I was able to sort of hide a lot of those, and I think the final results are pretty darn good and I'm pretty happy with. So let's talk about a little bit what I did along the way here. So this is an Atlas 50-foot box car. It is an former Oregon Pacific and Eastern box car. My goal was to convert it to an MFR patch car for the MFR, which you can see here that I did. I wanted lots of graffiti, I wanted lots of rust, I wanted lots of fading, that kind of thing. First step I did was I started with the fading. The car itself used to be this pretty kind of dark navy bluish looking color right here, like you kind of see. I did a lot of fading to the car. In order to do that, I took my airbrush and I took some of this. This is Vallejo's Model Airline. White gray is the color. And I thinned it down even more with some airbrush thinner, so that I got a very, very thin consistency to the paint, and then I sprayed it on the model. Now, one problem I had right away was when it went on the model, it wasn't aerosolized well enough, I guess. It went on the model and you could see like all the little individual sort of paint specks, if you will. It didn't go on very evenly, and the paint itself wasn't very small on there. I ended up having to take a brush and brushing vertical lines down the full model in order to sort of spread that paint out and thin it out a little bit. What that ended up doing was giving me some white kind of streaks across the entire model. I'm not sure exactly what I did wrong. This Model Airline is already a thin paint compared to most acrylic paints you might use in an airbrush. It's specifically formulated to work right out of the bottle in your airbrush. So I figured adding more airbrush thinner to that would just make it thinner and more aerosolized, but it didn't quite work out that way. Luckily, in the end, I did a lot of additional kind of streaking and work with the weathering to kind of hide that fading. So it worked out in the end, but definitely fading on this car is something that I need to take a look at in the future. Once I faded the entire car down, I then patched out areas of the car with this steel blue color, again from Model Air. So like areas in this area right here where the former road number was, and then I picked a couple of spots both on the front and the back and kind of masked off these kind of square areas and sprayed this dark blue. The idea being that like this is a car that's been through multiple owners, and It has been maybe patched a couple of times and had graffiti covered up on it a couple of times. The first time, they would have used a blue color very similar to the original color. So that's what the technique I used there was. Now, one thing I did do was anytime I applied paint to the model, first I did it on this back side of the car here. This would be the B side of the car. If you will. This is the side of the car that's not facing the aisleway, so it's not one that's seen by the operator. So if I screwed up on this side of the car, I was perfectly fine with that, knowing that I could practice kind of on this side of the car, make my mistakes here, and then correct those mistakes for the other side of the car. Although I do feel like this side of the car turned out pretty good as well. So turning it back to the A side of the car, the next step was to apply some rust spots. Now, I've already applied rust spots before on my previous Boxcar, except this time I did it a little bit different. I used a couple of paints this time, whereas the last time I just used one type of paint. So this time I used Saddle Brown and Burnt Umber, and these are Vallejo paints, and I just applied them with a thin, small brush. And I used the Saddle Brown first, and then I applied in this kind of the center of the Saddle Brown the darker color, and you can kind of see in a few spots throughout here, like especially this spot right in here, a couple of areas right here. You get just a little more color, a little more texture to the rust spots that you're kind of seeing, and it just gives it a little more depth. Let's compare that with actually my first Boxcar that I weathered, this orange one here, where I just used one color. You can see I just used kind of one color in this area. And although it looks realistic, I still feel it lacks a lot of detail and a lot of depth that comes from having multiple colors on a Boxcar. So if you kind of compare the rust spots between here and here, it's just a lot nicer on the newer car, on the blue car. Another thing I did was I used a small brush, and I wore some reading glasses. Turns out I'm old enough that I need readers now, and so that's kind of an important thing. And by doing that, I was able to actually get my brush strokes, as I would apply little spots of rust on the car, I was able to get those much smaller, much finer rust spots on the car itself, as opposed to on the previous car. You can kind of see some of these are a little bit larger, a little bit splotchier, whereas these are much finer and more refined. And just by putting on a pair of glasses, I was able to make that happen for myself, which is pretty great. Once I got done with that, I went with a new technique, new to me anyway, and that was I applied some oil colors over the top. And these are the two colors I chose, Burnt Sienna and Burnt Umber. And these are oil colors. These are Winsor Newton oil colors. They are really awesome. I highly recommend oil paints for your cars. So what I did was I applied them kind of up in the upper sill area here, and then using some mineral spirits, kind of just wiped with a thin brush, wiped down the length of the car, kind of between ribs. And what you get here is you can see, like especially right here, or like right in here, you see the streaking rust where it kind of rusts and the rusty water kind of streaks down the side of the car. It adds a lot of really nice fine detail and color to the car. In addition, the oil colors themselves are very rich in color. They don't, when acrylic dries, it dries a little less saturated in color, if you will. You don't have that issue with oil paints. So I went in with the oil paints as well and added some additional little specks here and there, especially along this area right in here where you're seeing the Goose logo. You're getting quite a few little specks of little oil color paint. And it goes on so fine and so small. It looks really, really good. Now the oil paint does take a few days to dry. I gave it about 2 days, I think, to dry between applications. So it does slow down the weathering process quite a bit. But in my opinion, the effects that you get from that are really very nice. Once that was done, it was time to apply the graphics to the side, the decals. I used a technique very similar to the previous time, a combination of microsole and microset on some water slide decals, and I was able to lay down those decals very nicely onto the car itself. One thing that I was able to really do, and I felt that was very successful this time around, was I was able to really get those decals into the crevices very, very nicely. There's some, if I tilt the car forward here, there's some kind of tricky areas kind of down in the recesses, which I was able to get the decal to lay down in. And that was really just a matter of applying multiple layers of the microsole, letting it dry between applications, maybe 3 or 4 layers of this, really kind of working slowly and carefully. I was able to sort of get this decal to kind of fit over top of this. While I did that process of kind of laying stuff down over top, down into the recesses and all that, the decal did kind of break apart in places, and that's something that kind of happens when you put a lot of microsole on a decal, is it'll start to break apart, especially when it's going around some of these kind of tougher areas of the ribbing. And so at that point I just kind of mixed up a color of blue or yellow or white that closely matched the original color of the decal, and then went back in and painted over those areas that broke apart. And I think, unless you're really looking for it, I think it does a really good job of sort of hiding those defects and those mistakes in the decal application process. And honestly, when it comes to like laying on these graffiti decals, I don't know that there's a really better way to do it than that. The only other option would be to actually paint them on yourself, and I'm certainly not good enough to do that myself. Smokebox graphics, safety stripes along the sides. In this case, I have a few right here, and I don't have any right here. The idea being like maybe this was painted over top of the safety stripes after they were initially applied. I saw a prototype photo that had it like that, and I thought that was kind of interesting, so I did that on here as well. But Smokebox Graphics makes reflective safety stripes that they're essentially stickers, and I think they look pretty good, and they work pretty good in this instance. Roof was done with acrylic and oil, rusting it up, put some washers on there. Pretty straightforward. I wiped off the tops of the ribbing a little bit in some areas just to kind of give that sort of texture and a difference, and the depth of that looks pretty good as well. Another thing I did to this car that I am doing to all the cars that I weather is I'm applying KD scale head couplers with the trip pins cut off. But I also add some additional details to this car. So I added brake hoses to both ends of the car. And those are tangent models, scale models brake hoses, if you can see that. I also wanted to add semi-scale wheel sets to the cars. So it's a little, see right there. And I got a bunch of Intermountain wheel sets. However, this is an Atlas car, and their trucks don't accept the Intermountain wheel sets. They're just a little too thin or something. The trucks are just a little off, and the wheel sets won't go in there. So I ended up getting tangent wheel sets. Essentially, I just tried to match as close as I could to the picture that I was working on as reference. So those are tangent wheel sets. And then additionally, these stirrups, in the process of weathering the other car, a number of the stirrups, they're very thin wire, and they broke off almost immediately. So these stirrups here are exact rail stirrups that I then replaced on this car as well. So we have upgraded couplers, we have brake hoses, we have upgraded trucks with roller bearing wheels, with real rotating roller bearings, and upgraded stirrups as well. Once I got that done, it was finally ready for finishing touches. I added some taco sauce, which is just Tamiya panel line accent color. In this case, I used dark brown. Applied it along the ribs, let it kind of flow down. That just adds a little bit of definition to these ribs. And then I also let it kind of flow over some of the decals, just to give them a little bit of weathering, so that the decals will look freshly painted. They look like they're kind of weathered on the car a little bit. Oh, another step that I did was in a couple of spots here, and in a number of places on the backside as well, I used a white gel pen that I purchased at Walmart to add just a few bits of tags. So this right here is a decal, but this right here is just a tag. I also used a black micron pen to add some tags along the grab irons right here on both sides. And there's a couple of spots on the car itself, like one spot right there, and on the other side I used quite a few actually. Flip it around so you can see the other side of this. There's quite a few spots on the other side where I added more of these tags, both white and black, kind of just playing and practicing my technique to make that work. Works pretty good. Not quite as fine in detail as a decal would be, but works pretty good overall. And then finally, I did a lighter coating than on the other car, my older model. But I did add some weathering powders. In this case, this is Dark Earth AIM weathering powders. Just to kind of tie the car together, add a little more weathering on top of the decal in a couple of areas, just to kind of give it some road dirt and grime. And then I sealed it all in with a dull coat spray paint. And that is it. That is a look at my second Boxcar that I've ever weathered. I'm really happy with the results. I think this, you know, if you are like me and kind of nervous about ruining your trains, don't be. I mean, this was my first car, which I have a video on previously, and I think it looks pretty good, but you can see how quickly I think your techniques improve and how much better your cars can look pretty darn quickly if you just kind of do what I did, which is go slow. Obviously watch other people's videos, watch how they did it, and try a few techniques, and you know, you'll find something that works well for you. Do it on the back side of the car so you can screw up the back side, and then perfect it on the front side. At least that's how I do it, and it works for me. So that is it. Before I start rambling, I'm going to go ahead and end this video, but thank you for checking it out. If you want to see more about the process of making this car, I do have a few live videos that I have dedicated to the process of adding details to this car and a little bit of weathering as well, a little bit of decaling, so you can kind of see how I did this car in real time. And from here on out, as I weather cars, I'm going to be doing that as a live weathering session on this channel. So keep an eye out. I'll be posting links to those live weathering sessions, and I'll try to give people a bit of a heads up on my Facebook page when I think I'm going to be able to sit down and do some weathering of these cars. Anyways, I'm totally rambling now, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video now before I go much further. Thanks for checking it out. Check out my Facebook page for more. And other than that, I will see everyone in another video.